and give us a talk about how he managed to fly planes. Now, he's been working as an engineer, and that's somebody who does design, does the calculations, certification, flight testing, organisation. So he's a proper engineer, as opposed to a technician.
I like you already.
Well, yeah, because I was an engineer to start with, and it irritated the hell out of me when you get people calling themselves engineers who just fix things. They're not engineers, they're technicians. Anyway, so he's had a long experience in the aerospace industry as an engineer. Learnt on tail dragon and pipe cops, I believe. We'll find out. I think at this point I will shut up and hand over to Jeremy. Thank you very much to you, Jeremy. Thank you.
So, the story is, that's me climbing out after flying the Hurricane for the first time. And I'm a bulk PPL, so how the hell did that happen? That's the question. So, in the beginning, wanted to learn to fly, and the Pilot magazine used to publish a Where to Fly guide every year. They probably still do, actually. When I got that one year, I was flicking through it, and I thought, oh, Super Cubs at Clacton, that could be fun, couldn't it? Then I saw the next one, Cambridge Flying Route, Tiger Moths. Oh, now that's the place, because that's the proper way to learn to fly. That's vintage flying and could lead anywhere. So let's go and learn to fly on those two aeroplanes at Cambridge. So off I went. And I learned from this chap, or one on the left, one on the right, Bill Ison, who, well, he was exactly as he looks. He was a Halton brat, he was an Anson air gunner, he was a Blenheim pilot, he was a Lancaster pilot, and he was the original CFI of the Cambridge Flying Group, and he had been teaching on Tiger Moths since the mid-50s. And he took no prisoners, and that was fine, because I wanted to learn properly. And Bill was the man, and huge admiration and affection for Bill. So, got my licence, that's the day I did my first solo, I think, on the Tiger Moth. Got my licence, and a friend and I were talking about buying an aeroplane. Okay, what are we going to get? Because I don't want to rent aeroplanes, they're very expensive, and they've probably got a safety undercarriage anyway. So, first aeroplane I bought was this D11. Bought it up. In fact, we're looking for a Jodel, and I was talking to Francis one day. I said, looking for two-seater Jodel, 117, 120, whatever. And he said, well, in the back of the magazine, there's a D11. Have you seen it? What's a D11? Well, it's the original two-seater. So, headed up to Crossland Moor, bought it, flew it back down. Within a week or two, a plug had come out, thread and all. So, okay, let's get that fixed. Anyway, we had to rebuild the thing. We did that at Cambridge Airport, where there was a very prolific aircraft builder called John, I can't remember his surname now. Anyway, he had a workshop there where they were building aeroplanes of all different sorts. And so we rebuilt the aeroplane there, took it back to Overseas Park, and it gave me my first overseas trip, which was to Western at Dublin. I was on a course there, and I thought, oh, I'll go and buy Jodel. I now realise how optimistic I was that when the course started I'd have arrived because the weather would have been good enough, but it did work. It did get wrecked, not by me, by my co-owner, but before it got wrecked, we were coming up for an annual permit renewal inspection, and we were going through the aeroplane, and I found a strand was broken on one of the rudder cables. Took the rudder cable out, and at this point I was thinking, I've got two small children, I really need a bigger aeroplane than a two-seater Jodel. Ideally a 2+2, a 1050 or something like that. So anyway, we took the rudder cable out, and took it down to Roger Target at Ninsfield, who some of you may know, and said, "Can you make me one of these, Roger?" And he said, yeah, what's it off? I said, "It's off a Joe Dell." He said, "Oh, okay." He said, "Do you want to buy a Joe Dell?" "Well, I've only actually come for a break." "What are you talking about?" He says, "Well, I've picked one up from for an insurance company. I've got it around the back here, and it's a 10.50, and they want final bids by Friday next week." Right, let's go and have a look. So, went to have a look, and this aeroplane had been ground looped on takeoff, by the way of ground looping, I think, at Cardiff by the previous owners. They had managed to not damage the wing, which was the crucial bit. They managed to collapse both undercarriage legs, so the wing went down reasonably level, scrapes and paint, that was it. And it looked actually in very good order, and we thought, okay, we can buy this. So put an offer in to the insurance company, and we got the aeroplane. So now we've got a two-seater Joe Dell with a new rudder cable and a new permit, and we've now got this broken one. And it was on a C of A. Now, at that point, Robin had given up the type certificates, probably know, on this series of aeroplanes. So I contacted the CAA and said, "Very kind of you to have a C of A on this aeroplane, but you know it's not eligible for one, don't you? You ought to give us a permit to fly." "Oh, no. And all sorts of cobblers. So we took them to a Regulation 6 appeal up at Kingsway, and some luminary from the CAA advisory board was sitting there officiating, and we had a couple of flunkies from the CAA on one side, myself and Jeff, my co-owner, on this side, saying, "This aeroplane, it's not eligible for a C of A. You're wrong in giving it a C of A, but it's perfectly airworthy, it will be when we fixed it, and it's eligible therefore for a permit to fly." And the flunkies said no, and we said yes, and the argument went on. And about 3/4 of the way through the hearing, the luminary at the front turned to me and said, "What's a permit to fly?" So all right, we've lost there, haven't we? We've got an idiot. Anyway, we did lose, but within a fortnight, the flunkies from the CAA had contacted me to say, "We see you've really got a case here. We're going to work with you. You can take it to a permit to fly." And I said, "Okay, that sounds very good." So it was a bit of a Pyrrhic victory for them. So we were fixing the aeroplane, and it needed its star annual that's coming up. Now that on a C of A aeroplane is quite expensive, as some of you will know. So I said, "Look, we've got this situation, star annual coming up. Minutes after that, we're going to take it to a permit. What can you do about this?" And they said, "What we'll do is we'll authorise your LAA inspector to sign off the star annual." So, from being completely obstructive, they'd swung right over the other side and become extremely helpful. And Craigie was confused by this. Why is a LAA inspector signing off the star annual? Don't worry, it's happening. So anyway, before we got this one fixed, I was thinking, I've got to have a problem in a minute. I've got a hangar space that's expensive at Oaksey Park. Any minute now, I'm going to have two aeroplanes, both of them in a hangar, so that's going to be doubly expensive, for as long as it takes to sell the two-seater. But luckily, Jeff crashed the two-seater before we got this one flying, and the insurance company bought it from us, which was very good of them. And in fact, they bought it for more than it was worth. We paid, well, to get that one flying, cost us about, to buy it and fix it and have it sit in the hangar airworthy, it cost us about 10.5 grand, which is about half what it was worth. So we sold a two-seater wrecked to the insurance company for 16 grand, and we ended up with a four-seater for 10.5. So I actually thought we did quite well out of that deal. And this aeroplane, I've still got it. I now own it on my own. And it's given me many tours around Europe, to as far as Poland, Luxembourg, no, not Luxembourg, Holland, Belgium, France, and Germany, mainly. And there's Basil and myself sitting there, standing there like prize ones. Anyway, so I'm flying Joe Dells. I learned to fly on Tiger Moths. know, we all probably want to fly exciting aeroplanes. I do anyway. And exciting for me, and if you put your fingers in your ears, for me, with aeroplanes, unlike with women, the older the better. So I was trying to get into old aeroplanes. So how do you do that? I didn't want to be in a position where somebody would say, could you fly X for us? And I have to say, oh, if only something stops you doing it. Oh, I don't want to do that. I want to try and have as many tools in the toolkit that allow me to do as many of these interesting things that might appear. And at the Cambridge Flying Group, finishing his PPL at the same time as me, was a chap I'll call Harold. Great Harold, I'll call it that. And I met him at the Moth Rally, as we were both finishing our PPL. And he said, what are you going to do next? I said, well, I'm going to buy a Jodel, a friend of mine. I said, what are you going to do? He said, well, I'm going to check out on Harvard's. And I thought, what a knob. And he is, and he still is, to a great extent, a bit of a, what I call the connoisseur of the art of self-abuse. But he said, but why are you going to do that? Because if somebody offers me the chance to fly a Spitfire, I want to be ready. Well, that's just like you're buying a second-hand spacesuit and somebody saying, do you want to come to the moon? But Harold has flown a Spitfire and a Hurricane and a Hawk and Nimrod. He's still a knob, but what he said had a lot of sense in it. And so what do I need to position myself to do this sort of thing? And there's a sort of the toolkit. So I got myself a class ratings instructor's ticket, and that got me flying some more aeroplanes. And then I got a flying instructor's ticket and an aerobatics instructor's ticket. I became an LAA coach. And all of these things, they're not massive things, but they're sort of filling holes in the matrix that allow you to be ready to do something. Difference is training on, well, not tail wheels, I learned on that, but superchargers, retractable landing carriers, constant speed propellers, lots of tail wheel time, and really lots of tail wheel time. They don't want somebody to turn up with 50 hours on the tail wheel. You've got to have, well, the more you have, the more credible you are, as you'll probably be aware. And fly as many things as I could, not Cessnas, proper things. So the next one of the steps was, right, let's go and do, well, I'm putting it that way, get an aerobatic rating, but that actually wasn't what I wanted to do. I thought, I'd quite like to fly a Pitts, because a Pitts is an iconic aeroplane. And then that sort of reversed me into doing aerobatics, because why on earth would you fly a Pitts if you're not going to do aerobatics? But that wasn't, my aim was to fly the Pitts, not to do aerobatics, which I think sounds a bit obtuse, but that's what it was. And I learned from this man, Alan Cassidy, again, I consider probably the best man to learn to fly aerobatics from. He had that Pitts, the White Waltham, he's multiple British champion, world aerobatic competitor, and he's written, as far as I'm concerned, the best book on aerobatics. It's digital, breaks it all down into its component parts to make you understand how it all works. So anyway, I went to fly the Pitts with Alan at White Waltham. And often people will do their aerobatic rating, but not solo the aeroplane. So I made it clear at the beginning. I want to check out the aeroplane, Alan, as well as do the aerobatic rating. So we did that. And then I thought White Waltham's a bit of a trek away from me. Because I live in Stroud, my aeroplane's at Oaksey Park. And somebody said, there's a two-seat Pitts at Kendal. That's interesting. So I phoned up the flying school that seemed to be operating it and said, can I hire your Pitts? I said, no, we don't hire it out. It's for lessons only. Okay. And then I think later that same day, the actual owner of the aeroplane phoned me up and says, at this point I had a class rating instructor's ticket and I had an aerobatic rating, brand new. And he said, are you an aerobatics instructor? I said, no, I'm not. Why? He says, well, if you were we need an aerobatics instructor to fly the Pitts. That's interesting, isn't it? What could I do about that? And I looked up what you had to do if you had some sort of instructor rating and an aerobatic rating. How do you put the two together? And basically, it's stupidly easy. So you go down to somebody like on-track aviation, and you do a couple of hours flying with one of their instructors who simulates you teaching him aerobatics. And then from one day not being an aerobatic pilot, next day I'm an aerobatic instructor. So, all right, Ian, I'm an aerobatic instructor now. Oh, great. Come and fly this pits. Come fly, give lessons in my pits. Right, I'll do that. I can hardly claim great competence or experience, but that's not the point. You've got your fingernails on the edge, so up you go. So I was giving aerobatic lessons in this aeroplane, and I don't know if anybody's flown the pits, but they're superb. You can position them minutely, do absolutely everything you say. And just as a slight distraction, when Cassidy gave me this lesson, and then I gave this lesson to everybody I flew with. Essentially, you put it into a loop, you're going up, you're three-eighths of the way round, and you haven't got enough energy, and you're here, and it's all going to worms. And what do? You close the throttle, and you let go of everything. When the ASI says 90 miles an hour again, you go flying. It's desperate to save your life, except on the runway, which is desperate to exit stage left or stage right, so you've got to be very, very quick on the guard pedals. As I said earlier, I want to fly interesting old aeroplanes. They've got a history, all the better. And in the hangar at Oaksey was a Rothmans Pitts, that one. And it is a pucker Rothmans team Pitts from the early 70s. And some of you will remember the sort of iconic Rothmans team who were flying at Biggin Hill and all the big shows, and with all the Neil Williams and all the sorts of famous aerobatic types. And it was owned by a chap who bought it and had it fixed, and he'd owned it 20 years before, sold it and then bought it back 20 years later. And I can't remember if he approached me or I approached him, or the maintenance guys made a connection anyway. I was going to give him coaching in his pits to get him back up to speed to fly his pits. He was a fairly miserable brummie, but I didn't care. I was flying Pucker Rothman's pits. And actually, he rapidly got up to 80% good enough and then stopped, because he was past it, frankly, which was a shame. And then he flogged the aeroplane, so that stopped. But I got to fly Rothman's pits, so I was really pleased with that. So that pit's disappeared, and I thought, well, what can I do now? I want to do something interesting. So at Staverton, there was an operation called Tiger Airways, who operated what sort of aeroplanes? Stops. Yes, they started with Tigers and they realised that skids on hard runways are no good. They really understand. But they had Stomps, and they. I approached them and said, "Can I hire your Stomp? Can I fly your Stomp?" No, we don't fly it. We don't hire it out. But do you want to fly it for us? Giving trial lessons, the trips around the bay. Now, I wasn't actually qualified to do that because I just had a class rating instructor ticket at that point. But I said, yeah, okay, I'll do it. And there was if an operation can do those sort of activities, if they've got a lot of flying instructors and one or two class rating instructors, it becomes a marginal activity, the CRI bit. The reality was I was doing half the flying, but I was going to turn a blind eye to that because I could then fly a Stomp. And Tiger Airways had a bus. They've gone bust now. They were always pretty flaky, but they've gone bust. In their hangar, they had 6 Stomps, all Renault engine S4Cs, SV4Cs. That one was the only one that was arguably airworthy. The other 5 either had no engines in them, or if they did have an engine in them, the engine had a hole that size in the crankcase where one of the commodores had left. So, and as I say, this one was arguably airworthy, and it used to cough and splutter, and you throttle back, is it going to stop? Is it going to keep going? So, always kept the field in sight. But their operation kept going long enough for me to do 50 hours in the Stomp, which I was very grateful Now back at Oaksey Park, there's a very diligent and professional maintenance organisation called the Classic Aeroplane Company, and in their hangar, they like to have old aeroplanes in there. They'll maintain anything, but they like to work on old ones. And in there, they had two of these. Well, they had a Ryan STA, that one, and they had a Ryan STM, which is very similar, but it's a military variant. It's actually got a bigger opening for the cockpit, the rear cockpit, because that's actually a two-seater. And I was sitting in the clubhouse one day, might have been with Dazzle actually, and we were doing an annual on the Joe Dell, and the maintenance boys came and said, right, will you fly the Ryan for us? Right, I will. I've never sat in one, never been near one. Blimey man. And essentially the story was that it was owned by a very wealthy Belgian who had most of his money, not most of his money, and an awful lot of very expensive cars, and this, by comparison, very cheap aeroplane. He didn't fly himself. The aeroplane had been on the ground for a handful of years, wanted to get it airworthy again, somebody to fly it. So I read up what there was on it, which wasn't much. I read the pilot's notes, which wasn't much. I managed to get hold of a chap in I don't know if he's in Australia or New Zealand now, he seems to go between the two, who has one of these, and he knows somebody who I sent an email to, and he responded, and I got, how does it come out with spin, does it spin, what's it like, and got all sorts of helpful tips off him, and then went flying in it. Sadly, it eventually got sold, strangely, to Australia, but fabulous old aeroplane, pure Americana. I mean, look at it. It's just polished aluminium. And there is somebody took a picture of me coming in it, which made me think of that one. So that's completely gratuitous. Apologies for that. They're all gratuitous actually. Now the other one was this STM, and this is owned by a chap, another wealthy chap. Wealthy chaps are good because they've got aeroplanes and they don't mind you flying them. And this chap lived in Guernsey, and he used to come over in his Grumman. I can't remember what his Grumman was. Anyway, he'd come over from Guernsey and fly his Ryan. He was a bit scared of it, and he wasn't actually very competent in it because he was scared of it, I think. So I said to him, do you want me to give you some coaching in it? Because I'd done 7 or 8 hours in the other one. I got to grips with it, and I thought this will fly the same, and it does. And he said, yeah, okay, we'll do that. And there were a few niggles. It wasn't working very well. There was, I can't remember, there were some technical issues that needed sorting out. So I said, look, I'll fly it, talk to the maintenance guys. Between us, we'll get it sorted, and then we'll give you some coaching. So we did 4 or 5 hours sorting out the aeroplane, and then a Friday, a week and a half away, I was going to fly with the owner in this. As I say, it's a 2-seater, just as a cover over the front cockpit. Looks much racier as a single seater. So yeah, Friday, a week and a half hence, we were going to go flying. The weekend before, there was a fly-in at Kemble. So he thought he'd go to that. So he came in, you're ahead of me. He came in from Guernsey with his son, 12-year-old son, who'd never been in this aeroplane before. Strapped him in, headed off to Kemble, where there was a stonking crosswind on the hard, to the extent that people who were very experienced on their tail wheel aircraft were having trouble getting it down the hard. The grass wasn't available. It was a public event, people are watching, tensions higher, and he broke it. So he put it on its nose, on its wingtip, and then the fire crew got the back end by pulling it down afterwards. So all the corners got smashed. If only waited a blooming week, we could have saved a wrecked aeroplane. But anyway, that aeroplane, that was about 3 or 4 years ago, and it's about to have its wings put back on, having been rebuilt. So hopefully it'll ask me to do a bit of a test flight. Also at Oaksey, there used to be 3 or 4 hornet moths actually, but this one, Ariadne, it's a very well-known hornet moth around the bazaars, and it's a group of, I think, 6. And they said to me, would you be our designated instructor to authorise new members to fly the aeroplane? They now actually have got an instructor in the group, but I think they want somebody independent to say, you come in, let's check you out, you're ready to go. So, absolutely, of course, I want to fly all aeroplanes. Strangely, that is probably the most difficult aeroplane I've ever flown. It looks very sedate, and in the sky, it tumbles around like a sort of shopping trolley, and it burbles along. On the runway, it's a complete and utter bastard, for various reasons, and some of it you can see here. Firstly, the main wings are quite a long way forward at the C of G, so it's very heavy on the tail, which means if it begins to swing, it's going to go in a hurry, because the increasing moment is rapid. Yawing. Added to that, it's got a completely cast ring tail wheel, so you get no resistance to yawing on the ground, no resistance to ground moving from the tail wheel. Got a rudder, but on the ground it is completely blanked by the fuselage. So the only thing you've got at low speed to stop it going sideways is the brakes. So if the brakes aren't working, you genuinely don't go flying. It's not, yeah, go, give it a go. You can't fly. You can't manoeuvre it on the ground. You can't do anything. So brakes are crucial. And if you'll notice that the lower wing is not very far off the ground, so the chances of going up on a wingtip are actually worse than they look, because the aileron has a mass balance, and the horn balance underneath, which comes down, of course, when you deflect the aileron. So it's actually, of all the aeroplanes I've ever flown, when I line up on the runway, and even that's not obvious because you're side by side with this tapering nose and nothing's square. So lining up on the runway is not as straightforward as you might imagine. I think most about, right, I'm lined up, pull it forward, everything's good, wind from there. And it's the aeroplane I think most about when I'm about to fly it. But it's a lovely old lady, so I'm very happy to fly it. 3 or 4 of their new group members have gone through and been signed off. So I also went off and got a flying instructor's ticket, because I thought, if I'm going to do these stomp type rides, these trips around the bay, I really should have a flying instructor's ticket to make it completely legit and you're not having to argue a marginal case. So I got my flying instructor's ticket with Aeros at Staverton, on my Jodel, which was good of them. They put the Jodel on the books and we did it on that, most of it. And as I got this instructor's tickets, there's a guy at Oaksey called Steve Jones, who's one of the Red Bull pilots, and he flies all the Warbirds for Arco and for the Sywell lot, and he's just a super chap. And he's not one of the massive egos. He's a very down-to-earth guy, doesn't shout about it, he does it brilliant. And he said to me, well, with your sort of experience, you could fly the classic wings on their Tigers over at Duxford. And John Cook, who you may remember, ran the LA coaching scheme for a number of years, he also said the same things, completely independently. So I said, well, okay, who do I talk to? And they put the good word in, contacted them. And so I got onto the roster for flying Tiger Moths at Duxford, which is it's Warbird Central. There are lots of warbirds around the world. Americans have lots of them, but there's nowhere else in the world that has this concentration of airworthy warbirds. You go there and the place is lousy with Spitfires. On any given day, there'll be 2-seat Spitfire rides, there'll be a Sea Fury running the engine, there'll be Catalina doing circuits. Tiger Moths, we're the scum of the earth by comparison with all the other stuff there. We're buzzing around. And even classic wings, on a busy day, on a full day, we'll have 4 Tiger Moths out, it'll have 2 Dragon Rapides, it'll have a Harvard, it'll have a 2-seat Spitfire and a single-seat Spitfire. And that's the full fleet on a really busy day. So it's active, it's live, there's lots going on, which makes it really quite exciting. So I started flying Tiger Moths for this lot. And I had a birthday come. was potentially in the frame. And I thought, well, that's good, isn't it? I better do that. I better book a flight in Spitfire. But I didn't. I thought, why don't I want a flight in a Spitfire? And I really knew that I didn't want a flight in a Spitfire. I wanted to fly a Spitfire, which is quite different.
Mm.
So I contacted the sort of two main operators at the time, which was the Lotte Headcorps and Bolt at Goodwood. And I eventually sent them a question, which was, can I go in the front, and will the pilot be an instructor, therefore I can put it in my logbook as P2 in a Spitfire? And the guys at Headcorps gave me bollocks, nonsense, didn't engage with the question. Guys at Boltby said, oh, okay, well, look, send us your experience, and I'll put it to the chief pilot, and we'll see what we can do. So I sent them my experience, and I had previously just tickled this itch, and I found out a couple of years before that if you want to solo a Spitfire, it's a 10-hour conversion course. Massive money. So I sent my details in, and Jim Schofield, who was their chief pilot at the time, came back to me and he said, we can convert you on a Spitfire in 5 hours. Well, a bit like Roger Target. That wasn't the question. The question was, can I sit in the front and is your bloke an instructor? But when you get sucked into these things, or I do anyway, it was a 10-hour conversion. He says, oh, you can do it in 5. Well, maybe I should look at this. And I phoned him up and said, look, get into solo standard. You haven't really done it, have you? You need to fly solo. And he said, yeah, we can do that. We get you to solo standard of the 2-seater, and then we let you fly up to 3 hours solo in the single-seater, which is on the previous page. And I thought, all right, I'll do that. And I rationalised that I could fund it through my company, which is me, staff training. And the rationale is that if the company, it makes it half price. Now, half price of a big number is not half a big number, it's still a big number. But a little bit of accountancy, if the company's got £100 and I want it, 20% goes on corporation tax, and the company gives me 80 quid. And then the tax man wants 40% of that, so he wants 32 quid off my 80. So what started out as 100 is now 48 quid in my pockets. So the company funds the training, half price, better than half price. So I booked up, and then a month or two later they sent out an email and said that the insurance landscape's changed. We can no longer offer you the solo stuff. So having had it offered, it's taken my hand off. No, I'm not doing that. It's too expensive for not getting it. And I was lamenting this fact at my next roster at Duxford. Sorry, I'm on your way here.
Yes.
I was lamenting this fact, and Barry Hughes, who was the CFI at the Classic Wings operation, he said, well, why don't you fly Kirk's Hurricane? Oh, I've never heard of this, what are you talking about? So I investigated and I found out. Now, do you have breaks in your spout sessions or just keep going? Right, there was going to be some music, but there isn't. Flew through it, 3 of those. So, this is what it's about. Peter Kirkpatrick, a neurosurgeon, owns 50% of a Mark 1 Hurricane. John Thorogood owns 25%, and Hawker Restorations own the other 25%. And they put together a program that allowed you to fly this aeroplane, depending on your competence and a certain set of training. And it starts with, lots and lots and lots of tailwheel time, as I said earlier. Not 20, but I got 2,500 hours tailwheel time. So you start on the Harvard. Now I had actually done a couple of checkouts on Harvards previously, so I had a tickle at the Harvards. But this one is a dedicated program. So what does it comprise of? Okay, various Harvard checkouts. So the Canadian Mark 1 was owned by Classic Wings, and I was going to go on their roster and checked out on their half, and they sold the bloody thing. All right. And then I had previously checked out on one by Wolfenbike, owned by a chap called Peter Tupley, but he wouldn't let anybody solo it. So I had some experience on Harvards. And That's the office of Wacky Wabbit, which is the camouflage one they use at Duxford, or did use at Duxford, for this hurricane training program. So we've got instrument panel on the left-hand side of the cockpit, right-hand side of the cockpit. Not too exciting. But it's got the pucker British spade grip, which gives it that added piquancy in my eyes. So I rechecked out on Harvard, went solo in that another 3 hours, and then they put you onto this hurricane program, which requires lots of tailwheel time. They want you to have aerobatic rating, they want you to have competence on aerobatics, which are not the same thing, as you all know. Minimum 10 hours solo on the Harvard, and there are various papers, human factors course you've got to do, technical paper on the Harvard, technical paper on the hurricane, and there are it's half a dozen lessons, exercises, call them what you will, that you have to go through to first fly the Harvard properly, and then fly the Harvard like a hurricane. And interestingly, in the circuit, the Hurricane and the Harvard are quite similar. They're big, hairy metal jobbies. Your height above the ground is similar, not the same, similar. The speeds, the numbers on the dials are quite similar in the circuit as well, and the view is quite similar. So you can fly a Harvard like a hurricane. And once you've done all that, you have a final check ride with Neil Oakman, who's the chief pilot of the hurricane operation. And I thought that was it. I'm going to go for it. Then the guy who went through this process just before me tried to land the hurricane with the wheels up. Now, Stu Goldspeed, who's the guy who always gives you the final brief, happened to be up in what happened to me. He was in a tower because it was this bloke's first flight in the hurricane. And he rushed in and said, tell the bastard to go round. What he'd actually done was he'd done the run and brake with the undercarriage down, wrong way around, pulled it up into the downwind, brought the undercarriage up, so it got out of sequence. So anyway, they got him to get it back on the ground with the wheels in the right place. Pat him on the head, give him a cup of tea, what went wrong, think about it, have another glass of water, come back in a couple of days' time and do it again properly. He did the same thing, tried to land it with the wheels up. So, got to do something. Obviously the training program's not working because this idiot's trying to land the thing with the wheels in the wrong place. So I had my final check ride with Neil Oakman, and then they introduced a final check ride with Dave Ratcliffe, who's one of the Arco pilots, who I never met before. So I was teamed up with Dave Ratcliffe, and his job was to say, hello, let's go flying in this Harvard, one of the Arco ones, known as Taz, and I'll decide if you can fly a Hurricane. He'd never met me before. I'd expect him afterwards, never flown with him before. And anyway, we went flying, and bless him, he said, you ready to fly the Hurricane? Oh, that's good, isn't it? So there's the Hurricane. It is a Battle of Britain veteran, or at least the data is. When they dug it out of the ground, it last arrived in the ground having been shot down by a German. So the aeroplane, or let's call it its spirit, was built by Hawkers in their Langley factory, delivered to Aston Down, where I used to glide, that's nice, for preparation for service. County Gloucester Squadron, got a connection with the county down the road, sent to Kenley, and it was shot down on its 7th sortie, and the pilot, Everett Bryan, taken to his parachute and survived for a while. So, you know, it was a 7 sortie aeroplane when it went into the ground in Kent. And it was, in 2018, no, not 2018, earlier than that, it was recovered by JCB, no doubt, and miraculously rebuilt. Whether the re's real, I don't really know, but rebuilt by Hawker Restorations, and Stu Goldspeed took it on its first flight in 2018. And then it hopped over to Duxford, and I actually saw it arrive at Duxford by sheer coincidence at the time. I had no idea on the day to fly it. And there is actually a 25% a share for sale for £500,000, which is obviously a big number, but it's actually good value for money if you're in that sort of market, which I'm not. And there are other people on the programme. And here's my mate Dom. And I was talking to Dom as we were standing next to Harvard. We were both going through the training programme. I said, who else is on this programme, Dom? And he said, well, there's obviously Neil and Mike. And they used to own Wacky Rabbit at Harvard. And then there's Bob, he flies at Shuttleworth. Right, and Kirk and John, obviously, who own the Hurricane. And then Andy, who now owns the Harvard, he's done it as well. And then there's Spitfire Mark. Why do you call him Spitfire Mark? Oh, well, he's got Spitfire, he's having rebuilt. Oh, right. And then there's Spitfire Trevor. What? Well, well, he hasn't got a Spitfire, but his father-in-law's got a Spitfire. It's been rebuilt. But he doesn't fly, so Trevor's going to fly. So we're just a pair of wankers, aren't we? Everybody else is in the Warbird world, and there's us oiks. There we are, the oiks, with the Hurricane in the background. But nonetheless. So, there's the office in this Hurricane, and I'll take you through some of the details. So on the left-hand side wall, you've got the top quadrant, which is the prop lever. It's in the fully fine position. The lever underneath, the black one pointing aft, is the throttle, and then underneath that is the friction knob. The view, by sheer coincidence, the camera angle that I've got in the centre picture is actually this sort of approximately the takeoff position you want to get it on the runway, with a sort of crescent cowling above the horizon, which is again the same as the Harvard. You get the crescent cowling above the horizon, and they both fly off cleanly at about 80 knots. And on the right, we've got the engine instruments. There's gun sight and there's a Morse key. Don't work. But the yellow thing is your oil pressure, very important. And the brown round dial down below is the coolant temperature, at least as important. You don't want it to go above 120 Celsius, otherwise you cook the engine. And really, in flight, you don't want to see more than 105 without doing something about 100 degrees Celsius. A bit further around the cockpit, up at the top of the instrument panel, you've got the undercarriage indicator, two reds at the top for the undercarriage being up, stays illuminated red all the time, unlike modern thinking, and two greens below when you get the undercarriage down. Oxygen panel bottom left, it's inoperative. Control column, obviously, main six-pack in the centre, again your engine instruments on the right. Now the picture on the right is the thing that's going to catch you out. It's the H-gate. In this axis it operates the flaps, in this axis it operates the undercarriage. And you see this safety catch here. So exactly, it's an ergonomic nightmare. So flaps is easy, go up and down, they're pneumatically operated. No, not hydraulically operated. And when you're going to take off, the red knob should live in the centre here. Before you line up on the runway, you flick that round so that this catch is out of the way and you can lift the undercarriage. And you don't want it in that. I feel nervous having it in that position ever. So that's the important, scary bit. So a bit further down, lower down on the left, you've got the fuel selector and then the flap indicator. It's an ergonomic mess. Things are just scattered everywhere. In the centre, it's got one of the old P-type compasses, and you'll see ahead of the air pressure gauge for the brakes this knurled knob, so you can wind the rudder pedals back and forth, and it's a nice, easy adjustment on the rudder pedals. And on the right, you've got that big handbrake thing, which is the emergency hydraulic pump for flaps and undercarriage. And then further round on the left of the cockpit, where you've got to give yourself a big neck to look at, you've got your voltmeter and ammeter. The right hand of the two toggle switches is a pre-oiler switch, which is a modern addition. So on the first flight of the day, you put put the flight ground switch to flight, and you put the pre-oiler on for about 2 minutes. It basically begins to calibrate the flat of oil, turn it off. And the knob on the end of the valve cable is to lock the canopy. And you lock the canopy open, because when you open it in flight, it wants to come forward. So you twist that over and it stops it coming forwards. Top right picture, there's 2 black buttons on the left. One is the start and one is the booster coil. You have to press the 2 together to get the engine cranking over, and then you put the mags on whilst holding the stick back. So you do all sorts of strange convolutions. And you can just see the top of the data plate underneath the idle cutout full. That's Battle of Britain veteran data plate, that is. 57 sorties.
What's the brass? It looks like a old brass light switch.
Interesting question, and I didn't have a clue. And on one of my flights, Kirk said, "Oh, you landed with the landing light on."
Yeah.
No, I didn't. I have no idea there was a landing light that worked. So somebody had obviously thrown that switch, which is the landing light switch. But I didn't know that until very recently.
It's a light switch.
So, Rats has said you're ready to fly the Hurricane. You've done all the necessary training, you've passed all the necessary technical papers, multi-choice, they're not very complex. So on your first day, you get in there, and you're not going flying. You're going to start the damn thing, and then you're going to taxi around, because it's got pneumatic brakes, which have got a... Let's go back a couple. The little lever you can see poking up on the front of the spade grip, not the gun button, but the one on the other side, that's like a push bike lever, that's a pneumatic brake thingy. And it applies the brakes, and if you've got rudder applied, it applies brake that side or that side. So the first thing you do when you get in this aeroplane is you're not going flying. You're going to get in, you're going to learn to start it, you're going to taxi, get used to these funny pneumatic brakes, which have got a sort of lag in them and then they bite. So you've just got to pulse them more or less. And then you go home. You've had enough excitement for the day, so you go home. And those are some of the numbers on the aeroplane. It's nearly a 3.5-ton aeroplane. It's a big aeroplane. It's a big, imposing aeroplane. It's got currently a V&E of 300 miles an hour, unless there are Germans suspected, because obviously that's an artificial CAA permit to fly limitation. We knew they did an awful lot more than that. It's got quite a low flap and undercarriage limited speed, 120 miles an hour, so you have to be careful not to exceed that when you've got the kit hanging down. And your over-the-hedge speed is 80 to 85 miles an hour. Unless the engine's dead, you want to go a bit faster to get some airflow over the tail. It'll stall clean 75 miles an hour, and in the landing config, it'll stall at something like 60 to 65. It's not very handleable at that, which is why you want to come in at something like 80 over the threshold, so you've got some controllability on the aeroplane. You want to do some loops, get it up to 260 miles an hour, you roll it a bit slower, 220, and it doesn't burn fuel. It's got 94 gallons on board. If you're doing aeros, it's burning 60 gallons an hour. If you've got it throttling right back into the cruise, why would you? It'll burn about 35 gallons an hour. As I said, the cooling temperature, you want it to go near 120, and if it gets near 105 in flight, do something about it because it's going the wrong way. The power settings we use are very gentle on the aeroplane. We don't go to more than plus 4 pounds of boost on takeoff. In wartime, you stay around at plus 12, so we're not thrashing the engine at all. And we might go up to plus 5 if we're doing some aeros at 2600 RPM. And you can say get the RPM and the boost right down if you're just cruising around trying to go somewhere. And he says, I put plus 0 boost, because you don't want 0, you just want to crank half a needle above 0, so that the engine is properly boosted rather than not boosted. So you're about to go flying in this aeroplane. Stu Goldspink, another one, the Warbird scenario. Again, a lovely bloke, not quite in the airs or graces, very straightforward guy. And the last thing he says to you is, it's just an aeroplane. Go and enjoy yourself. And of course, it is just an aeroplane. It's a squadron aeroplane. It wasn't for the gods or Supermen or anything. But on another level, it's a Hawker Hurricane. It's which is completely different. So anyway, you approach the aeroplane, and in you get. And you're at Duxford, and it's Warburg Central. And the place is crawling with people who are experts on all these sorts of aeroplanes. Some of them, like Stu Goldspink and Steve Jones, are lovely blokes. And some of them aren't. Some of them are desperate to see you fail, or cock it up. And they're all bloody well watching. They're all out there. So you go flying. Now, Andy, the guy who owns the Harvard, videoed my first. You do a run and break. When you arrive at the airfield, you don't join downwind and land. You do a run and break. Ostensibly to get rid of all that speed down to 120 miles an hour so you can get the gear down. To an extent it's that, but it's a bit of flash as well, isn't it? You come thundering over the airfield at 250 miles an hour and you pull up into the downwind leg. So I'm doing 220 miles an hour here. It doesn't look fast, but it is, in light aeroplane terms, it's fast.
Last one, Jeremy. Go solo.
Listen to that murmur, isn't it gorgeous? So you crank it round, pull it up, pull the power back, and you're waiting for the needle to go below 120, and you then get the gear down. Now, that was me doing a run and break on 06, so that's the northeasterly runway at Duxford, on which I'd taken off. And then we go to my land. No. Okay, this is a different run and break, but I thought I'd get a bit of video from inside the cockpit, just to give you an idea of what it might feel like in the aeroplane. And it's bloody noisy, and I apologise for that. And the camera works rubbish because it's me holding my phone whilst I'm trying to do a run and break at 250 miles an hour. So it's a bit wobbly. But we'll see the one road is one of the light separations. So I'm trying to find the airfield, not looking through into the final road. So you come in 1,500 feet, we're doing 220, and at the bottom of it we're doing 250. And at this point, I think, okay, I've now got to concentrate. So I better do something. I better put the camera away and start pulling the speed back and getting the undercarriage down and getting the door up, the lid open, and set myself up to land. Now, the Harvard owner filmed the landing, and Kirk, the Hurricane owner, filmed the landing. Now I can break the suspense because at the end of the landing roll, Stu Goldspink said he cracked it. But the two people filming it are talking and they're giving two different stories. One thing I notice is I'm coming in from the direction I've just gone. So I got a call as I was downwind from the tower saying the wind has really changed. We think it's now favouring 2-4. You might want to use 2-4. Now that wasn't the FISO at Duxford suggesting that. He was telling me that, but it wasn't him suggesting it. It was Stu Goldspink. So I thought, right, I'm going to do what Stu Goldspink says. So turned round on downwind, back round, and came in on 2-4 instead of 0-6, where I've just done the run and break. And you see the Harvard that we did the training on down there. So Stu Goldspink's head, you'll hear Hurricane owner flapping like a mother hen, and at the end you might just hear Stu Goldspink saying nailed it or cracked it. And there's an old video coming that's better, from the better perspective. So he wouldn't want him to land downwind. I'm very pleased he didn't. just in a moment, Kirk starts flapping.
Keep it left, keep it left, keep it left. Let's see how it's twitching.
It wasn't.
Perfect.
Crackly says Stu Goldspring. It wasn't twitching. It ran beautifully straight. But this was it's actually a better view of it because
Okay,
it's
so the power.
ground level.
No pressure, Jeremy.
As I say, everybody bloody well watching. You're the air show.
So close the throttle shut. Beautiful.
Now, you will see the rudder flapping like a bastard because you do have to pedal it to keep it going straight. But it does go straight if you land it.
Yeah.
No, it's worse than Joe down. But it does run straight, but as it slows down, it can decide it's going to go wayward. And just to give a slightly different, this is a later landing, but there are two. There's a Spitfire Trevor, his father-in-law owns a Spitfire, having restored Spitfire Trevor, now flown it. He's filming this, and across the screen will go an American marked Spitfire, which is owned by a chap called George Hay, who's a really nice guy, but he's somewhat blunt. So what pleases me about this is that they both were satisfied. Oh no, that's the wrong way. And you'll see that I'm using quite a lot of the runway before I'm getting it down, because I don't know where the bloody runway is. So I'm creeping it down under a bit of power.
Very nice.
Says George. There's his Spitfire. So the point is,
Very nice.
you're on display, you're on show, you're being tested, or you feel like you're being tested all the time that you fly at Duxford. And so if you can get, not all my landings have been that good by the way, the second one was a thumper, but most people watching the first one, so I was pleased with that. And I've just got one more video clip again from inside the cockpit, just to show, just try and get an idea of what it's like. So this Cambridge over on the right, and straight ahead. Again, rubbish filming with my phone. You'll see the artificial horizon is all over the place. It's perfectly serviceable, that's my flying. So that was it. So, that's the beast. And that was how a bog PPL ended up flying that aeroplane. And it all sort of worked. At the end of it, duty carried out, and my criteria are the crew and the aeroplane reusable, and they were. And so far I've flown 6 hours in it, mostly off the hard and landing on the grass, but I've landed on the hard a couple of times. And the first time I landed on the hard, as I said, I don't know where the bloody runway is. You're up there, it's a slightly different height to the Harvard, so you don't quite know where the runway is. And a lot of people arrive at the runway in their first landing too early because they're flying at Harvard height, which is why I crept it in like a bit of power until I thought, I've got to be either on the runway or underground by now. But on my first landing on the hard, I thought, I know exactly where the runway is. I know exactly where it is. So I could bring it in, I flared it, closed the throttle, and I dropped an inch onto the runway. It ran perfectly straight. And I was as pleased as punch. I thought, I've nailed this. I know where the runway is. I know what to do. Next time I landed it on the hard, I thumped it down a bit, and it was going squirrely, and I full left throttle, and the bloody thing was going right, and I had to use it. And then those that were involved, so Helen, who said, why don't you go and book a flight in Spitfire, she didn't really know what she was letting us all in for. Those are the people who are sort of involved. That's it. Any questions?
Did you hear about it?
Yeah, you do.
You did.
Yeah, you hear about it quite nicely. It's
Yeah.
got an interesting quirk, in that it's dynamically longitudinally unstable. So if you pull it into a steep turn and pull back, you're pulling around, then you find that actually, hang on, I'm having to stop it, come all the way back. And it's the same at in the fourth quarter of a loop. You go up, and you go round, you float round, as you're coming down, pulling it, and then it begins to, okay, I've got to stop. So it's dynamically, longitudinally unstable at high G. But it loops nicely, it rolls nicely. It's got a delight to, it's not like a pit which you're scrambling your brains. It's a unless you're a German, it's a gentlemanly sort of aerobatic aeroplane.
Is it heavy? Is it heavy to
No.
manoeuvre?
No, it's nice on the controls.
Yeah.
Yeah. You've got enough power, you've got 1,000 odd horsepower to drag you around the sky, so it's got enough power to do it.
Is it lighter than a Harvard to roll? and stuff?
Yes, it is. It is lighter than Harvard. It's got, I was going to say it's got a strange motion on the stick. It doesn't feel strange when you got it, but the stick on the elevator, it pivots, it hinges at the floor, and on ailerons it hinges here, so you're sort of doing this. But you don't notice, you just
do it, yeah.
it doesn't feel odd when you do it. But what I did find is when I had to use a bit of brake on, and I found this out subsequently flying a Fairchild Argus a couple of weeks back, is it's got a wide stance on its undercarriage, and you think, well, that's going to make it nice and stable, and will that make it less prone to ground looping? Well, it doesn't. It actually makes it more prone to ground looping. What affects the stability of ground looping is how far back the main wheels are and getting closer and closer to the C of G. Because if they're this far apart, if you go a bit sideways, the moment arm ain't very big pulling you around. But if the main undercarriage is here and you get a bit further out, the bloody thing's going to swing. So the distance between the main undercarriage centre line and the C of G is the thing that's going to determine whether it's a swing or not, which is why the Hornet's so bad, because the undercarriage is up near the prop. But a wide stance is not helpful, because if you've got a narrow track like a Spitfire, if this wheel gets a bit more drag, the turning moment's not very much. If you're out here and you put a bit of brake on one, or it gets in the long grass, the turning moment is much bigger. So a wide stance, contrary to what you might imagine initially, is not helpful in ground looping. It's unhelpful. Sorry?
Keeps the wingtip off the ground.
There is that, yeah. It will stop you rolling, but it will help you to ground loop. And that's what I found when I had to apply the brake on the runway. I thought, bloody hell, they're all over the place now. So not only it did stop the swing, but it destabilised the thing, and I was zigzagging down the runway there. There you go.
How much did it cost?
Sorry?
How much did it cost you? I don't mean after your business stuff, but how much did that training come in at, do you reckon?
There's two figures here. That which you told your wife.
Well,
Bank manager.
no, she is sufficiently relaxed that it's coming out of company funds. It's semi-detached because it's in company funds. I haven't totted up the Harvard training, but we were paying. The Harvard training is not easy to understand. It's easy to understand. It's not easy to estimate. But the Harvard is charged on the Hobbs meter, which starts as you go through 40 knots and stops as you come back through 40 knots. So all the taxiing about the beginning of the takeoff roll and the end of the landing roll, and not clicking away on the Hobbs. I think we were paying about £700 an hour on the Hobbs plus the fuel. So when it comes back, you refuel it. So if you're doing circuits, you don't do touch and goes. You land, ultimately it stops. You gently taxi around until you get to the other end, and you've got another 7 or 8 minutes in your logbook, and it's hardly cost you anything. You let yourself go. So it probably worked, the Harvard in that sort of mode probably worked out about £450 an hour. Now the hurricane that Helen's sitting in is an awful lot more. That is £3,000 an hour plus VAT, plus the fuel. So it works out about £4,250 an hour. But my thinking was, look, when I'm sitting in the old people's home, dribbling out the window, thinking, I wish I'd done something, well, to hell with it, I'm going to go and do it. And then nobody was going to say, would you like to come and fly our Spitfire? They were not going to do that. As I said, my dominant pair of wankers, they didn't look very close to do it. So I thought, I've got to, why don't you fly Kirk's Hurricane? He says the CFI. Right, I'm going to explain. So that's why it works.
They tell you what the excess is.
They did. It's not mad. It's not mad. Originally, it was something like 50 grand. Bloody hell. But Kirk, he's a neurosurgeon. He's no idiot. So he's insured it with an excess of 50 grand, and then he's insured the excess. I don't really know how it works, but I'm sure the underwriters do. So the excess is it's either 500 or 1,000. It's a manageable number. But you don't want to break it because everybody's watching. And when you drag the aeroplane out, and it lives in one of the First World War hangars, in the IWM hangar, next to a Mark 1 Spitfire, you're the show. You know, your hangar doors open, and you're pulling out a Mark 1 Hurricane across the public area, behind the tractor, over the airside gate, get it onto the grass, you fanny about, check the oil, check the fuel, pre-flight it. You know, you're running around in your romper suit. So instantly there's people at the fence, so the pressure's slightly up. And then start up, there's more people at the fence because there's smoke and there's noise, and then off you go, and you feel like you're under the microscope. You certainly do. So
Can you take it anywhere else?
Sorry?
Can you take it anywhere else?
Well, I suppose you can if you can afford to. You don't want to go too far because it's an odd one. Initially, Kirk said minimum. Could you get charged airtime, airborne time? So you wheels off the runway to wheels back on the runway is what you're charged for, plus the fuel in the Hurricane. It doesn't have a hops. And initially Kirk said, I don't want sorties of less than half an hour airborne, so that everything can get nicely warmed up and we can justify everybody coming out to help drag it out the hangar, etc., etc. So you can probably do 40 minutes chop to chop, 45 minutes chop to chop, for half an hour airborne. And to be honest, you go out and on the first sortie they say, don't do any errors. All right, I don't want to quit my pitch here, so I'm not going to do any errors. But on the second sortie, I went out over the Great Drains north of Cambridge and go out all the way out to the Wash. So here's a nice line feature. So I did some loops and some half Cubans and some wing overs. And in some of those you change your heading by 180 degrees, and some of them you don't. And I lost count. I thought, which way am I facing? Because there's the Great Drain, and it goes that way and it goes that way. And I thought, oh, look at the DI. Bollocks, I didn't set the DI. So on my second flight in a Hurricane, well, I know where I am, but I don't know where to go. and I thought, well, okay, what I'll do is I'll find a compass. And let me just show you where the compass lives.
Oh, it's off scale.
So, it's gone. It's gone. So the DI is here, which I hadn't set. I thought, that's all right, I'll use the compass. Where's the compass? Exactly. Behind or in front of the stick. I couldn't find it. So, but for about 30 seconds, I thought, oh, I don't know where to go now. Until I thought, okay, it's about 5 o'clock. The sun will be the direction I want to go. And luckily, it wasn't too cloudy. Right, that's the way to go. But for a moment, I was not quite lost, but didn't know where I was going. But what I was saying was, you go and do errors, and half an hour is too long, actually. You go up, you do a few loops, a few rolls, and some wing overs, and then you go, I'm going to go back now. Oh, hang on, I've only used 15 minutes. I've got to fly around. And it's costing me money to fly around, and I really want to land. So you don't want to go too far. And errors are a joy. But Kirk has relaxed that now. He says, if there's 2 or 3 people going to fly on a day, as long as more than half an hour of that is airborne total, then we're all right. So you go up, you do a roll, you come home. What I've done on the last couple of flights is actually do 2 landings, go round. And a sortie is you take off and you go off somewhere, you come back, you do a run and brake, as I say, a bit of flash, canopy open on the downwind, undercarriage down, flaps down, and in you come, and you land. And so a circuit detail is that twice or 3 times, or however many you feel like you want to do. And you want to stick a roll in it somewhere because you really want. There you go.
What's your ultimate plan here then? Because you were saying, you know, these are all the ticks in the boxes you need to get to the next thing, the next weird aeroplane, etc. What's your ambitions now? Where you want to fly?
It's an interesting one. Flying the Hurricane is an end in itself. I don't think John Romain's going to give me a call tomorrow and say, look, the Mustang, can you come do that for us? I've heard you're great. So, to an extent, the flying the Hurricane is an end in itself. But, I'm talking to Steve Jones at Oaksey, he's one of the Warbird stars. I said, yeah, I've been flying the Hurricane. He said, oh, bloody hell, you got 6 hours ago, you got more time on it than me. He says, I'll mention you to the blokes at Sywell. That's probably the end of it. Maybe it isn't though. Maybe they'll say, oh God, if only we had someone to ferry that Hurricane from here to there one day. I'll walk there to fly and I'll walk back. But I don't know, who knows. But what I have done is I've got myself onto the instructor list, and sort of just on the edge of the roster for the Wacky Wabbit, the camouflage Harvard, giving trial lessons.
Yeah. So
Trips around the bay in Harvard. So we don't get paid for that, we're volunteer pilots. But that's free Harvard flying. So that's building up heavy tail wheel ancient aeroplane hours and experience. And a couple of weeks ago, last week, I went down to Goodwood to do what we call a backseat checkout. Because in a Harvard, you can fly it from the front because visibility is what it is, it's reasonable. From the back, you can't even see the aerodrome, let alone the runway. So flying it from the back is a completely different proposition. But I thought, if I get myself checked out to captain the aeroplane from the back, that puts me one step up on the majority of Harvard pilots, being prepared malarkey. And I didn't do it on the Wacky Wabbit one because they know me and I'm flying their aeroplane. I thought I'll go and do it at Goodwood and try and inveigle myself with the Goodwood operation and hopefully get put on their roster, which may or may not happen. But anyway, so backseat check ride, now captain for the back. Andy, the Wacky Wabbit Harvard owner, sent me a text. Got an ex-South African Air Force pilot who used to fly Harvards. He wants some sessions with. And he said a backseat check. Do you want me in the back or these other bloke in the back? So I want you in the back. So instantly, the backseat check ride is beginning to pay dividends. So that's going to be a 2-day session sometime in the next couple of months.
do you want to instruct on it then properly? Teach other people to fly it?
I wouldn't mind, yeah. I wouldn't mind that. There's very few Harvard. People will teach you to fly their Harvard. Let's go to the Warbird world. There are no Warbirds in the world that you can hire, except that one. And you've got to jump through some hoops to fly that one. Nobody else will let you fly their Warbird. Even if it's a 2-seat Spitfire, you can fly it, but there's captains in the back. So no Warbirds, not that one. That's almost the same for Harvards. You can get checked out on a Harvard, and the guy will say, right, you're now competent to fly a Harvard. Okay, you're going to get out? No. They won't do it because it's their business aeroplane, it's their business tool. So this Harvard is more or less the only one you can, certainly in the UK, that you used to be able to check out solo hire. He's now stopped that, but those of us through the gate can solo hire it, can solo fly it, or fly it for him. So there are people who will train, there are Harvard operations around that will check you out on type, but they won't let you actually solo it. So I'd be quite happy to do that if somebody wanted to. And although the view from the back, I sort of led myself to believe the view was appalling. And it's not good, but once you get in there and start trying to work it, you go, okay, I can make this happen. So it's not as bad as I let myself to believe. So maybe Harvard instructing, wait for John or May to give me a call. You know,
Would you say the Hurricane is more difficult to fly than the Harvard? I'm just thinking
Yes.
that, you know,
Yes.
in World War II, when people trained on Harvards and they went sailing on Hurricane,
yeah,
just like that,
Yeah.
you know, and
just like what?
you know, a lot less experience than you in most cases.
Yeah, but they've had a lot more time on Harvards than I did. That's the thing.
That broke a lot of time.
That's the point. Yeah. Nowadays, it's exactly the same aeroplane, but it's a completely different scenario. This one's more than a £2 million aeroplane.
Oh, yeah.
They were 15 grand or something.
I'm not suggesting.
But it is, and I think about it. It is more difficult on it's in the sky. Nobody cares. It's what it's like on the runway that's the hassle. And because it's got a cast-wing tail wheel, it is more prone to directional waywardness.
Do you have any ambitions to fly older aircraft?
Absolutely. If the Shuttleworth collection phoned me up, Duxford is my second favourite place in the world. Old Warden is my favourite place in the world. As I said, the older the better. So if I could fly, an SE5 or a Gloucester Gladiator, God, wouldn't that be fantastic? Love it. But
Yeah.
a lot of these places you've got to put in days or weeks of volunteering, years of volunteering, and then you might get a tap on the shoulder. Would you like to sweep the hangar floor? Oh, thank you, sir. and eventually you might get into the tiger moth, and you know.
If you,
I've just spotted the Ariadne driver in the back.
Okay, fine.
do you have an absolute dream aeroplane you would love to fly? I mean, the one above all of those that you'd like
No,
to
the
fly?
answer is no. I wanted to fly something really, really interesting. And the Hurricane is on the level that would have satisfied any of those things. Possibly more so than a Spitfire. Because as I say, Duxford is lousy with Spitfires. There's only a dozen airworthy Hurricanes in the whole world. There's probably 60 Spitfires. Common as muck. Maybe a Gladiator? Gladiator would be good. Gladiator, maybe. That's my next challenge. But yeah, there's only two of those airworthy.
There's a two-seat Hurricane, isn't there?
There is a two-seat Hurricane, yes, girls' aeroplane. This one, you're either flying it or you're eating it, which I liked actually.
But if you can fly the two-seat one, you might not have to pay for it.
I've not got a commercial license. So to do these experience flights, what they call SSAC, Safety Standards Acknowledgement and something. Basically, if you're giving a ride to somebody in a Spitfire, safety standards acknowledgement and consent. Basically, you accept that this aeroplane ain't built to the current safety standards and it's not safe. The CAA said to give those rides, you've got to have a commercial license at least. As I said, I'm a Bob PPL, so unfortunately, and I'm not going to go through the rigmarole of getting a commercial license because it's a lot of faff and I've got damn paint to keep an eye on. So yeah, so unfortunately, but if somebody want to be an instructor, then I can do that. Not going to happen, is it? So who knows? It's serendipity. It's, as I said, positioning yourself to take advantage of an opportunity should it arise. And maybe the opportunity won't arise, but if something does, okay, I can do that. Who knows?
Who did you instruct in the Harvard? I think you did mention some of it, didn't you?
For the Hurricane training in the Harvard, it was Neil Oakland, who's the chief pilot.
For the initial?
The initial one was Peter Tuplin. The first time I checked out solo standard, but he wouldn't get out of the aeroplane, was Peter Tuplin at White Wolf. If I'd known he wouldn't get out of the aeroplane, I probably wouldn't have spent money training with it. But at the end of it, I can't let it go solo. What bloody do? So what I did say was, right, you can sit in the back, shut the hell up, and only shut up if there's a problem. I can do a circuit, which I put this solo. Always put P1, but he wouldn't get out. So Peter Tuplin did the first one. The second time I checked out again on a classic Prince one. And they look fine. Dale somebody. Neil opened on this one. Neil's used to be a part owner of the Harvard. He's got sort of 450, 500 hours at Harvard's. Very accomplished Harvard pilot, and he's flown the Hurricane as well. He's for his day job, he's a Ryanair driver or training captain. Any more questions?
Right, any more questions? Everybody's
There's a
just
tip.
like, we want to go and do that.
Well, you can.
Well,
That's the moral of the story. I'm a bulk PPL, so you can.
yeah.
You can.
But the key is, as you were saying, position yourself so
Yeah.
you can grab the opportunities when they turn on.
And you know, it's one of those things that you can look back in retrospect and go, oh yeah, I put all these things in place. It wasn't that calculated, obviously, life never is. But when you look back at it, you go, okay, that all sort of fell into place into a narrative that maybe not have been there when it was happening.
Would you not say that the moral of the story isn't like, he's, like you say, you've put yourself in a place that you can do something that's interesting, because everybody in the room, if they're the current pilots, can still do something that's possibly a bit more interesting than they're already doing, should they want to do it. You know,
And
not necessarily end up flying a Hurricane, but if you end up flying
But you hit the
another
right-
aeroplane you're interested in,
Absolutely,
whatever that
but
is.
you use the right phrase if they want to do it. And
Yeah.
if somebody wants to fly their Piper Cub to Leon Sonar and back for a bacon bucket each weekend, that's brilliant.
Absolutely.
But if they want to do something more off the beaten track, try and broaden your experience to make yourself, show a bit of leg, as it were, make yourself appealing to the people who might want you to fly their aeroplanes. And try and find somebody rich with an aeroplane who hasn't got a pilot's license. That's the gold standard.
Yeah, it was interesting you managed to get this through your company, because when I wanted to learn to fly, I asked my accountants if I could do that, and they were like, to get a PPL licence, and they were like, I don't think you should do that, you know.
Well, and it's an interesting one. The articles of association of my company are aeronautical engineering consultancy and vintage aircraft operation and training. So I can say, look, if I'm going to fly, we need to get into training people on Harvards. This is all about credibility for training people on Harvards.
Yeah. Right. Can we all just show our appreciation?
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.